And I think like the idea is this year that our engineers won't actually be writing any more code themselves, that like almost exclusively agents are writing everything. We still have manual review for PR, but even that I think will probably need to change eventually.
That's a big deal.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Staff Edge podcast. I'm Alex Kessinger, and I'm here with David. How's it going, David?
Hey, everybody.
And we have our new guest, Karynn Ikeda. Karynn, we'd love you just to sort of give an introduction for yourself.
Yeah, so I'm Karynn Ikeda. I'm a former engineering manager at BabyList, and we help growing families. Namely, we have a baby registry and a shop where you can buy baby things for yourself and your loved ones. And yeah, over the last year, I've been helping to roll out AI across my team as well as our larger engineering org.
Awesome. Yeah, so one of the questions we've been asking folks as we start this is like, can you help us understand the first sort of like aha moment you had with AI?
Well, it's actually at home. My husband is also a software engineer at a different company, and we are both remote. And so our offices are side by side. And I just remember him calling me over one day, extremely excited because he had built this Snowflake data analyst integration in Cursor. His team was lacking a data analyst at the time. And he was showing me all of these like insights that he was pulling out. And I was just like, oh, wow, this is like really incredible. And at the time, I also didn't have a data analyst. So that also was like, this is like actually really useful. And I think from there, it was, I think, just kind of snowballed. And it was also right around the time that leadership at my company was starting to heavily invest in AI. So it's sort of like the meeting of the moments definitely was kind of, shifted my point of view.
Yeah, so maybe we can talk about that a little bit. So like how did your company go about adopting AI, and like what was your role?
Yeah, so I think like most companies, like early or like later in 2024, the entire company jumped on ChatGPT, and it was very much that for a long time. So not like super in kind of coding and developer workflows. And then in 2025, Shopify Memo came out, and I think that definitely shifted a lot of mindsets. And around that time, our CTO, who I think is very much an AI advocate, was like, we need to get developers actually trying more specialized AI tools. And so he brought in Cursor, Windsurf, just a bunch of different tools. And at the time, we weren't sort of trying to say, like, this is the right tool, because quite frankly, we didn't know which one was the right tool at that time. But the idea was to just get people exposed to it and actually like using it in their day-to-day work.
And just to clarify for folks who are following along, the Shopify memo, you're talking about the one where Toby, Luca, the founder of Shopify, sent a note to everybody basically saying like using AI is your job now, right? Is that
Yes.
kind of the summary? Yeah, okay, cool.
Yes.
We'll share a link to that in the notes just in case anyone is catching up. But yeah, that was a big moment for the industry for sure.
So in that sort of like when you started bringing in those tools, can you remember some of like the early activities that your engineers were doing that you felt like was bringing a lot of value to the organization?
Yeah, so on my team specifically, we kind of went a little early. So I brought in Windsurf initially as a pilot for the team. And our development cycles go in about like 6-week increments. And so the ask was that for 6 weeks, they, instead of their normal IDE, whether it was VS Code or RubyMine, because we're a Ruby shop, that they use Windsurf exclusively. It was, I admit, like a little painful to start. The people coming from RubyMine were complaining about their key bindings, and VS Code people were basically like, this is just VS Code with like an agent and code completion, and why is this special? And I would say it actually took about like 3 weeks, so like half of our development cycle, before people really started to be like, oh, maybe there's something different here. And kind of what I prompted the team with was kind of daily in Slack, I would ask them, what's working, what's not working. I would try to sort of troubleshoot with them when they would like complain about like, the AI is like not really completing what I want. I would like point them towards something in Windsurf documentation. At that time, I wasn't really using Windsurf myself, but I was like trying to like read up about it, trying to resource myself, trying to be a resource for the team that, didn't have time to like dig through all the documentation. Now I'm sure it would be different. You just like ask AI what to do. But at the time we weren't quite there yet. And so it was really interesting to see that mindset for the team shift over that 6-week period. And I was really surprised because by the end, it was sort of like, would you recommend this to the entire team? And even the person on the team who was most skeptical at the time was like, yes, I think I do like recommend that we roll this out across engineering.
What was like the impetus for the most skeptical person to sort of change your mind? Did you get a sense of like, was there any specific, started the show off by asking about sort of like the moment where it clicked for you? Did you get a sense that there was a moment where it clicked for this person?
I think that it was like a single moment, but I think anytime you use these tools, there's always a learning curve and you're always going to be really bad at it before you're really good. And so I think it was just like being in it day to day. They just got better. They got better at prompting. They got better at leveraging the different parts, like when to use code completion versus when to actually chat about it. And I think like they started to see like real gains in how much more quickly they could get their work done. And I think when they started to be like, oh, like this thing is actually helping me and it's actually making me move a little bit faster, then you started to get people's buy-in to be like, oh, this is like useful. This is more than just code completion. Because I think honestly, like going from code completion into a chat is a much more of a mindset shift as its own. And then going from that to agents is like yet another mindset shift. You're kind of like pulling people slowly along the way on that journey.
So after the 6-week pilot, is that when the company decided to sort of roll this out more broadly to everyone?
Yeah, so there were a couple things we did. This also coincided around the time that we did our annual department offsite in Chicago. And so I also led what was like a vibe coding session at that offsite. So the goal was in an hour, vibe code like a simple browser game. And that was with everyone in engineering. It was sort of like choose your own. I think we gave them access to Lovable, V0. They could use Cursor and like all of the other agentic IDE tools at the time. And that was really trying to push some people towards like an aha moment of like, okay, what can I possibly do in an hour? And I would say like we got mixed results. Like some people were still exactly where they were before the event, but you definitely saw other people of like, oh, wow, like this is so much more than I could have ever done in an hour. And that was kind of like, a fun way to do that with the engineering org, and sort of also gave them something to think back to when we were sort of more prescriptive about now we want you to use an IDE with agentic tools. Again, we weren't prescriptive, so they could choose between Cursor, Windsurf. I forget if Claude Code was out at the time, but Klein, I think a few people chose that. So we kind of put everyone out there. They were sort of bets in a way because we didn't know where these tools were going to go and how they were going to evolve. So we were sort of like, our engineers will find the best tool and eventually we'll consolidate, but now is not the time to consolidate around a single tool. And this was probably in, I would say, May, June of last year in 2025.
Cool. How have things evolved since then? Where is your company at now in terms of usage? And a lot of the folks we've talked to reference sort of like a turning point in Q4 of 2025. Does that sort of line up with your experience?
Yeah, I would say it might even be a little bit earlier in Q3. So I think like initially we had a few asks of the engineers that they start tagging their PRs, like when they use an agent to write the code. And so we could get visibility into what they were using, whether it was Cursor or Windsurf or another tool. And then we also were working on what we called our knowledge base. So this may be Cursor rules or different tools, call them different things, but kind of like this aspect of context and memory. We started creating something that could be used across different tools, and that definitely helped. We adopted Devin as sort of like our agentic agent in the cloud and saw pretty good adoption of that as well. And so I would say like by the start of Q4, the majority of engineers were producing at least one agentic PR per week. And you could really see it across the code base. I think at that time, we also started to see a shift away from sort of the IDEs towards Claude Code. And that happened pretty organically. Whereas I think through word of mouth, engineers started to hear about it. And in general, when we were still using Windsurf and Cursor, most people were choosing the Claude models. And so I think the fact that like, you'd kind of be locked into Anthropic's ecosystem wasn't much of a concern because a lot of engineers were already choosing those models in other environments. And so definitely by the end of Q4, pretty much the entire engineering org had shifted towards Claude Code. And that was sort of when we decided to like consolidate around Claude Code and invest in that ecosystem and started onboarding skills, or I think they refer to them as plugins now, more specific to our organization and working with them.
I'm curious, it sounds like your company has made a lot of decisions to invest in AI, and some of the things that you're mentioning, like using agents. When you talk about using agents like Devin, you're having them like write code in your okay. So like a lot of companies, when you're like, hey, we're going to take this random agent and we're going to start letting it mess with our pull requests and have access to all of our repos, like that conversation wouldn't go so well. I'm kind of curious, how do you feel like the conversation's unfolding at a company like yours? And like, what do you think is making it successful? Like that people are like rolling this out so quickly and investing in things quickly?
Yeah, I mean, I think leadership has been a huge aspect of this. Certainly, if you don't have leadership support, right, like you won't even get access to a lot of these tools. And so, I think our CTO was basically given a very generous budget to essentially go out and pursue and so anytime someone brought a new tool to him, he was just like, yes, send this to procurement. We also worked with procurement to get these approved very quickly so that they wouldn't spend months just deciding if we could use this tool. And I think the other thing I'll say is this coincided with a more broader AI enablement initiative across the entire company. So even in our non-technical orgs. So there was definitely a sense across the company of like, oh, the entire company is invested in AI. And this was continued to be emphasized at all hands, at department meetings as well. And so I think certainly the support from leadership, and leadership was also, I think, definitely, being a bit more of like pushing people towards these tools. And then I would say like, leadership can say and do a lot of things, but if you don't actually have engineers on the ground who are supporting this, then I think that will also hinder your efforts. And so we have a working group of staff engineers, and we essentially put them in charge of all of the key kind of decisions of how we would actually deploy this out. So they're the ones who are like, we need something to manage memory and context. And so we're going to spend a few weeks spiking on that and getting people from across engineering to contribute to that and figuring out what does it look like to contribute to that. And they were also involved in sort of surveying the engineers. We also had a staff engineer literally go around and interview different engineers to understand like what their workflows were and put together best practices for the rest. And so it was kind of like the message from leadership, in addition to, right, our engineers actually seeing our staff engineers, our senior engineers being like leading the way, which I think was invaluable for every other engineer to sort of see like, oh, this is not just coming from leadership, this is coming from my peers as well.
That's really cool. So I'm trying to understand all the ways that you've brought to bear on rolling this out. You did a pilot. You had like a hackathon where you vibe coded some things. It sounds like you've asked your like senior IC leadership sort of get involved, help make decisions, roll out best practices. Your leadership has sort of been pushing on this. I'm curious, are there any other like tools or techniques that the company has used to sort of like roll this out and get maximum productivity from AI?
We did end up setting some sort of like AI OKRs as sort of like a focus around that. I think that has been helpful, and again, just like giving focus. So what are we actually trying to achieve? Because I think there is a lot of different directions you can take it. You can look at PR velocity, you can look at technical debt, you can look at just like, are we shipping more features? And so there's like a lot of different ways to measure, and I think that is like part of the challenge of this. Ultimately, what we ended up doing was just surveying the engineers week to week and sort of asking, what is your confidence that AI can take you most of the way for a back end change, a front end change, all sorts of that. So, like, we really ended up tying this a lot to the sentiment of the engineers because, again, like, engineers are experts in our code base. They should know if a tool is helping or hindering them. And this kind of just like got us outside of the discussion of like we need to like build or buy like X, Y, and Z to measure this. And I think there's like a real risk that you just get like bogged down in the measurement conversation for a really long time. And so I think my advice would be pick something that's like relatively easy to measure and just like run with it, and like don't spend like too much time overthinking it. And if you already have like a tool that or you already have been like measuring developed sentiment, then just like leverage that, because oftentimes the way you're going to measure it is maybe not even right the first thing, but like if you start somewhere, right, you can always iterate and improve.
Yeah, I think measuring developer sentiment makes a ton of sense from an organizational standpoint, um, because developer productivity is sort of notoriously difficult to measure. I am curious though if there's sort of like a qualitative sense that velocity has shifted. There does the sort of like the product org or business leadership sort of sense any change in output velocity?
I think for sure, like you see, like the top 10% of engineers have become incredibly productive, and they're like probably 10x of where they were a year ago. Is that true for like every engineer at the company? Probably not. Like, I definitely think like it is a gradient of like you have some people who are really like the power users, and then you have people who are still like learning to leverage the tools more. I think this year the focus has really been on agent orchestration, so managing multiple agents who are writing code simultaneously. And so we do expect that eventually when engineers become confident in using this, that will also help in their velocity. Because again, I think like the idea is this year that our engineers won't actually be writing any more code themselves, that like almost exclusively agents are writing everything. We still have manual review for PR, but even that I think will probably need to change eventually.
I mean, that's a big deal, right? Like, um, I think we've all sort of, I don't know, like, I don't know what the right metaphor is, but like walked backwards into this world where we're all looking at ourselves and saying we're not going to be writing any code by the end of the year. And, I mean, first of all, let's pour one out. It was fun writing code, but also like, um, I guess what are you all doing um, around that, like at a systems level? So when I think about sort of like agent generated code, I think about like what are the CI/CD processes around that code? Do we have evals in place to know if our coding agents themselves are like changing qualitatively in ways that matter for our organization? What you mentioned earlier, like the sort of the skills and plugins and like basically the context engineering that you give that you build up around your code base for the coding agents to use. I'd love to just get kind of more nitty gritty into all of those things. What are the things that have worked? What are the areas where you struggle? What are sort of like some of the systems that you expect to evolve a lot over the next year, et cetera?
Yeah, I would say like we certainly are very early days with skills. Like none of our skills are backed by like evals, right? It is very sort of like subjective at this point. Certainly the guidance has been to like iterate on skills or like iterate like, if you see that AI is doing something that like it shouldn't be doing, like add that to our knowledge base, add that to memory so that it doesn't keep doing right now. That is extremely ad hoc. We don't have a like systemic way of doing it. I think there have been like some interesting suggestions across the industry, sort of this idea that like in order for AI to better navigate your code base, you need like up-to-date documentation. And like what if you had some agent that's like going around like, in the background documenting things to make it more readable way. Like we're not there yet for sure. But I think that is certainly a direction that we're looking to head. And I think like, again, like I'm not an expert in coding, right? Because I haven't actually touched code, although like you could say that like with agents, maybe I am actually coding again. But certainly that like we trust our engineers to be able to say again, like, what does quality look like? What is like a best practice that we would always want an agent to adhere to? But I think it is certainly a bit of a wild west at the moment. And we haven't like gotten to the point where we're like, really, it's like a dedicated part of our system. So we're still definitely early in that journey.
Have your engineers had any conversations about reviewing the code, like the output? Like, like I think a conversation that I've been having with a number of engineers is like PRs are about to explode if they haven't already. And reviewing agent generated PRs can feel kind of odd for folks. I'm curious if you've had any sort of conversations with engineers around reviewing larger volume of PRs.
It hasn't come up as like a super painful pain point at the moment. I think it's something we're like aware of, but I think it's also something that we're like, we don't want to like solution ahead of something. Like we actually want to see like what is painful or like what's breaking before we like heavily invest in a solution. That being said, like we've done like some pilots with different like that will like leave comments. Some are better than others. You might have noticed that Anthropic released its own code review agent that it's now saying takes $15 to $25 per PR for a review. So I mean, code review remains to be, I think, a challenge for everyone. I think most engineers have been able to keep up with the workflow, given that the majority of the org is not yet, massively orchestrating agents. But I think it is something that we are aware of. And certainly right now, the guidance last year, and is still somewhat true this year, is even if an agent is writing the code, you are still responsible for the code, right? You deploy it, you monitor it, you roll it back if like something happens. And so I think like at least early on, people were still like looking at the PR for quality. And so like, there was still a human touch there. And I think that was also felt by reviewers. And we also still as an organization tried to put up small PRs rather than massive PRs. And so like I think that also helps with like being able to review something quickly.
I'm curious, like the ability for these tools to quickly grow in cost, but your company has like adopted OKRs and stuff. I'm curious, have you all thought about how you're going to balance the cost of these tools compared to the output?
Yeah, I mean, we look at it as like if we were to like in a world without AI tools, how many engineers would we have to hire, right, to get the same amount? And so I think for us, like when, we're spending in the tens and when we get to like the hundreds of thousands that we're doing that, I think we always again say like, well, we used to put that towards human labor, but now we're just like paying it in a different way. And so certainly, and I think you also have to look at it in terms of outcomes. Like if we're able to release a feature that makes the business X amount of dollars, and yes, it's completely worth it to pay, even in this world where we're paying $15 to $25 per, right? If that results in less downtime because, you know, a minute of downtime causes us, you know, hundreds of thousands of dollars, then again, like it is completely worth it.
One of the models that we came up with last, when we were chatting with our last guest, was the rollout of things like CI/CD in our organization as being like a mental model for what we're doing now. You know, there was a point in the industry where you couldn't imagine deploying without like a dedicated deploy team, you know, and so it would be wild for you to just like go from a pull request like to production within minutes. I'm curious if that mental model is something that you would agree with.
Yeah, in terms of like having guardrails, I think, again, I think this is why coding has been, you know, in the words of the Claude Code founder, solved, right, before other disciplines. I think it is specifically because we have such good guardrails within engineering, you know, linters and tests and, you know, all these different things that make it safe to make a change, even if you're not completely aware of like everything that's happening in the system. And I think like similarly with AI and agents, eventually the good guardrails will come. You know, I think evals is potentially a way to get there and certainly is used in sort of AI feature production. At least for our company, hasn't quite made it into the tooling. AI is non-deterministic, right? You don't know what it's going to do. In fact, we recently released a dev environment setup skill to our organization. And one of the initiatives that I'm working on right now is we're trying to get our product managers and designers into the code base. And so we did this like massive workshop where like we tried to onboard 30 people onto our dev environment. And even though we had this one skill, across those 30 people, you could really tell that the agent was onboarding them with slightly different tweaks to the instructions. And then we had to like troubleshoot and get through them. And so like that was definitely a great example to be like, we should have evals to make sure like it is installing something using Homebrew and not like in a different way because this causes issues, you know, stuff like that.
Yeah, and even like I think building out, there's still lots of value in building out deterministic tools that the agents can wield. Like for a dev setup, you can imagine like a bespoke CLI or whatever, or even just like a bash script that you ship as part of the skill. You mentioned something really, really interesting though, like basically, if I understood that correctly, onboarding people who are not programmers to start using AI. And that's, you know, these days, I didn't get into it at the beginning, but I spent a lot of my career at Stripe. I'm now leading a very small startup. And so most of the people in our team are programmers, but I've recently been working with our designer who's fantastic, but who's not a programmer, who's learning sort of like how to use AI. And it's been, or how to use AI in this way, I should say. And it's been amazing. It's been really cool to see her sort of learn to use these tools to like affect our code base based, you know, and bridge the gap from the tools that she already knew. What's been your experience there? Like, what are the things that work and the things that don't work? I have found that like the terminal is a very intimidating place for people who aren't programmers, and so you know, I'm curious if you've seen that and how you've worked around that. Just yeah, what's been your experience?
Yeah, I'd say it's extremely early days. Like I'd say we launched this initiative in the last month, and I will agree with you. People are intimidated with terminal. It's just something they've never had to use before. I think we're trying experiments of like, again, because we're in Claude Code, we have a lot of options. Right, the Claude app actually has a coding tab, so we're sort of like letting people know it's there, seeing who uses it. We've also been sort of showing them how to use Claude Code within VS Code, right? Either using the Claude Code plugin, or if you just want to open a terminal window within that. I myself use iTerm, so I'm kind of in a terminal environment myself, and I think it's interesting because when I think of like, I also have this, you know, think of this like one particular designer myself who has been so excited. And I would say like, this is probably actually the most rewarding part of my job at the moment is just working with people who I've never like had this ability to make a change or something, especially with a designer. It's like something that's like frustrated you for a really long time, but you know that the engineers are never going to pick it up because it's just not that important. But like you as a designer, right, as like the steward of like the look and feel, are just like, oh, if only we could do that. And she's like gone wild on our iOS application, which to me is like so impressive because like
So
I'm
cool.
a back end Ruby developer. I even feel scared touching iOS code, especially since like you can't roll that stuff back really easily, right? It's like all in different releases and whatnot. But I think more than anything, a lot of right people who come from these like traditional non-coding backgrounds need like encouragement and confidence, which I think is not actually that different from where engineering was. It's like you just need to give people encouragement and confidence. And I think you also, because there is a lot of like doomsday talk around AI, whether it's going to like eliminate jobs or you won't have a job. And I think like sometimes a lot of like the aha moments or like the fun of it is lost. And like that's what I see in her and this designer in particular is she is just like having so much fun like doing this and like feeling like really empowered by this. It's like it's kind of an infectious energy. It's like you work with her for a few months and like you almost feel like you were when you were like brand new to coding, because I also come from a non-traditional background,
Me too.
a coding boot camp. And it is like, it's like I've almost like forgotten what that feels like, but not quite, since I'm a little bit closer to it. And it
And
is, yeah.
oh, sorry to interrupt, but like, do what you're saying resonates because it's a bit. Actually, Alex and I found in the first season of the show, when we talked to a lot of staff engineers, that there was sort of a pattern there too of like non-traditional backgrounds. I think just because you're bringing a lot of different contexts to problems, and you're viewing problems as more than just programming problems, but as like organizational problems, people problem, whatever, right? Like there's multiple layers to any problem that you can tackle. And so in the first season of this show, and it was pre-AI really, and we were just talking about like what is staff engineering. We found a lot of people with non-traditional backgrounds, and I think part of the reason why we found a lot of those people in staff engineering roles is because like, oh, it turns out that my like liberal arts degree is actually really helpful when I'm trying to convince an entire organization to do something I need to write persuasively or whatever, right? And pretty early days on this season, but I think that it's possible that the same sort of lesson applies to AI adoption, where if you have sort of defined yourself as a person who writes code singularly, then AI is going to feel really threatening to you. But if you sort of view yourself as a person who solves problems using the tools at your disposal, AI is so exciting, right? It's like this massive unlock. It's like a hacker's dream. It's like it just explodes all possibilities. And I think that what you were describing about sort of the fun returning and feeling sort of like the akin to like the early days of learning to program, I think that's the coolest thing to me. And I think like there are all sorts of doomsday things. We can't know what's coming around the bend. We're in a wacky timeline right now, but like we can at least have fun and get really good at like wielding this new power that exists in the world. Like, why not, right? Anyway, monologue over. I didn't intend to get on my soapbox, but that's been the coolest part for me too, is seeing that sort of joy return to the creative act.
Yeah, completely. And I mean, we haven't even gotten into this like whole can of worms around like personal software, because like that's the other thing that like
Mm.
I haven't really done myself, but I've seen other engineers is like they've created like this custom software that like is like part of their like ideal workflow. In fact, there's like one engineer who is completely orchestrating his agents almost entirely through voice, and he's like built this personal software so it will like talk to him when an agent is done. It will like read to him what the issue is. He'll talk back to it. He can switch between sessions. Like it's some like truly like very futuristic stuff, except it's not the future. It's like happening like right now. And it's amazing that like he's just done this like in his spare, like all the time that he would have been coding. He's just like built himself like the perfect personalized workflow.
That's amazing. Do you have any other examples of like either like a designer or product person, like sort of pursuing a personal passion that brings them to do something really amazing?
I mean, I know a lot of PMs who are working on side projects on the side. I don't know if that's like that different than a lot of product people. It's just like they can get a lot further than maybe in the past. But we're a remote company, so I think that's actually one of the challenges for us. It's actually hard to like peer into anyone's like day to day and like actually like see what they're doing. And I think it's like something that like I wish we had an office for, because you can imagine that if you're in an office, the ideas and the innovation would be that much more free flowing, because then someone would actually like look at this engineer who's like talking to his computer and be like, what is that? That seems like super interesting. They'd like walk over, they'd like see what he built. They'd probably be like, oh, can you share that with me? And before you know it, you have this like sound problem at the office because everyone's trying to like talk to their computers. But yeah, I wish I could peer into all my engineers' work environments, because I think there's something probably, especially in the next year, I think will be a lot of like innovation.
Does BabyList have a culture of pairing at all?
We haven't, but it's interesting that you say that, because that's the direction we actually want to go towards. I think, like most companies, we spend a lot of time talking about work in meetings rather than like doing work together. But I think like the speed at which you can now make changes makes it like a really ripe time to actually like work together. And especially, I think pairing becomes so crucial as we're trying to get our PMs and designers. Is right now we have essentially asked the engineer, like, pair with your PM and designer, like show them how you code, and then similarly like turn it over to them and like watch them code and like give them, right, your best practices and your advice, so that they can again like gain that confidence in the code base and they feel that they can like prompt the agent effectively. And so I think right now we're actually looking at different tools that are more geared towards pair programming than Google Meet, because I think we do see that as the future of our company, which I think is good, because when you're working with agents all day, you get lonely, even though you could talk to them, but it's nice to talk to people. So I'm glad that we're actually trying
How do
to.
you know you're talking to people though?
It's true. In a year, you might wonder if like I'm just like some random AI person, because everything will be at that high fidelity.
It is a strange new world. So sorry to derail. I couldn't help myself.
So, speaking of sort of like the just speculating on the future, I think that's a really interesting thought that you have, which is like you can imagine that like all computing type things, inference is going to get faster. The agent loop speed will get faster. There has to be a point in time where this approaches the ability for us sitting in a meeting to just yell out to the AI, okay, create a version like X, create a version like X, and just enumerate all the potential outcomes. I think that's a really interesting thought experiment, where it's like if you just put a product person, a designer, and an engineer in a group, a pod, and they just talk to this thing, largely over having an engineer, sort of like build out the system in a loop with them.
I mean, this is like the dream for anyone, I think, who is like creative and like likes to tinker. It's just like there is no difference between the idea and the solution in front of you. It's just, you just talk and it's like instantiated into existence. I mean, you talk about like wizardry. I think like AI is like the closest to magic we've ever had.
For sure. Yeah, I'd love maybe like to get a little speculative, So, we talked about like, being able to work together as a group, but I'm curious, like, do you have any other sort of speculation about like where this is headed? Are there any experiments that you're really excited about doing at work? Anything like that?
I mean, in terms of where the industry is headed, I feel like a lot of people have said it, right? Like the 3-person pod, like these disciplines of sort of like role blending. I mean, I think there is like this most fantastical world where, right, like as knowledge workers, we don't have to be like tied to our desk. Like there's a lot of like sort of like working remotely with your agent, where you can like take your mobile phone, go on a walk somewhere, and you just basically like every time you talk to the agent, it goes off and do something, you check in again. And so like I think like selfishly I would love this world where we're not like always tied to our desks, and we can like actually like do other human things, like go get a cup of coffee, walk when the sun is out, all those types of things. I think in terms of, I think voice is like a really big one for me. Like I do actually think we will be talking much more to our computers, just because there's actually this great story that my sister-in-law told me. So she was talking about a friend of theirs. They have a son, he's 5 years old, and he likes to get up on weekends and talk to Alexa about the latest basketball stats. And like he'll just like do this on his own while his like parents are like still waking up. And to me, like that was like another aha moment of like, the next generation is not going to be scared of AI. They're going to like grow up interacting with it. And, if you believe like the devices that like all these companies are working on, there is definitely going to be something in the home, and it's definitely going to have a voice interface. And so you can imagine this next generation is just going to grow up talking to computers. Like they're not going to know about GUIs. I don't know. I mean, maybe they'll still learn how to type, but like typing will kind of probably go the way of cursive at some point. And to me, it's like kind of it's like kind of like an amazing but also scary world, because like everything we design for is based on a GUI. It's based on you interacting with a screen. And like, what does the world look like when so much of how you interact with a computer, like online internet, is like almost entirely through voice? Like it's a completely new user interface. And I think that's actually one of the more exciting transitions, because it's like, it's just another paradigm. It's like going from like books to the internet or something.
Yeah, my bold claim is that Markdown is the new cursive.
It's kind of wild that cursive became I guess like obsolete within our generation. And I think you're right, Corinne, that like typing is likely going to be obsolete, or at least archaic in the coming generations. What do you like? This is a digression, shocker. What's your advice for like um, junior engineers, or people maybe younger who are interested in who are creative people that like to tinker? What's like what's the what should they do?
I mean, I think like jump into the tools. I think again, like indexing on the fun, like it's never been, I think, more fun to see like what you can build and create in a short amount of time. And I think like that part of it, like they should definitely lean into. I think the flip side of that is like you also want to like understand like what the AI is doing and like why it's doing it. And so like you should also use it to like explain what it's doing and teach you different concepts, and be like, okay, why do I need Webpack? Like what even like is Webpack for? Or like just different tools, or like what is an API? Because I think, right,
No way. The
there's
best
like
part of AI for me has been that I never need to worry about Webpack ever again.
yeah. But I think there is this idea that like you still want critical thinking in the loop. And I think that's the biggest part. Like it's easy for us to say because we have like decades of experience that like we're falling back on. But like for someone completely new, like they don't have as many experiences. I think in some ways like it biases them less, and they can like just play and like orchestrate things. And I think like you still have to figure out like where does judgment and taste come in. And I think like part of it will be through experience. And maybe there's like a new experience to learn. Maybe they just end up breaking a bunch of things, and that's how they learn. And it will look completely different from like the way we broke things. But I think like ultimately you learn through feedback, whether that's like feedback the AI is giving you or another person. But I'd say like for any young person, I think actually the advice hasn't really changed that much. It's like always ask for feedback. Maybe the only difference now is you can also get feedback from the AI.
Yeah, I have a hypothesis that choosing how we architect our code is going to become even more critical than it was in the past, because you're going to want to make sure that you're making your system legible, right, to these agents. And the more legible it can be to the agents, the more value and more productivity you're going to get out of the agents. And in that world, you still have to make that choice. You have to have that critical thinking. You have to say, what is the right architecture? Right? You have to have taste, you have to have experience. And so I've been playing around with, like, how could I help people quickly adopt something like domain driven design or something like that. And so you can take this really messy code base and you could maybe use AI to very quickly move it into the right shape and then benefit from the productivity gains that you have. But that's going to require that less experienced engineers get skilled up into this concept of domain-driven design. And I really hope that the AI can really explode their learning, so it won't take as long to get there.
Yeah, I love that so much. And I love this idea of like domain driven design, because I think it really puts like semantics at the center. And again, like creating these divisions about like what AI needs to know about, what it needs to actually load into its context, right? Because especially in like a large code base, right? We have a monolith. There's so much code to look at. But if you can just like point it towards like a particular directory or something, instantly you will get better results because you're taking up less context.
Totally. So our famous last question, which is new now, it's a new way, but like, how much code are you writing? Or how much code are you having written?
I am embarrassingly writing very little code, even with agents. It's something I want to change, for sure. But I think a lot of how I leverage AI is to decipher what I'm doing, working with a lot of people. So I introduced myself as a former engineering manager because I have been slowly taking on this new role as sort of like program manager for AI enablement, not engineering product and design org. It's very new. It's only a month old. And so a lot of what I'm trying to figure out is how do we sort of like shift teams to working faster? How do we bring in right designers and product managers? And I think a lot of that is it is about tooling, but it is also a lot about the human relationships.
That's interesting. Can you talk a little bit about like how you're using AI in this new role?
What's supposed to be the last question, Alex?
It's just too interesting.
Well, I mean, one thing is like I'm working across 4 different teams. And if I went to all these teams' meetings, like I literally would have no time left in my day. And so what I've had the teams do is like add me to the meeting so I can get like the Google Meet notes and transcripts. And then I use AI to basically tell me what's going on with these teams. Like where are they getting stuck? What are they focused on? Have they done the thing that they said they've done? And again, like the tooling and my skills right now is like still very rough, but it's like kind of how I'm resourcing me and like trying to be in like a dozen different places at once, but really like I'm just one person. So I can't attend every meeting. And again, like attending meetings just for informational purposes is probably not the best use of my time. And so it's sort of like this idea of like having your AI note taker, which I think is like not super revolutionary, but I also use it to write weekly updates and things like that. Things that like would, boring stuff that would normally take me an hour, I can do in 10 minutes. I'm sure I'll find better use cases for it, but I'm trying to like, free up time for more critical thinking. And again, like engaging with people, because a lot of what I'm doing right now is putting together programming, getting other people, ICs to talk about the work they're doing. And so really just like giving people a platform across the organization. Because I think my general belief is enablement and adoption is much more effective if it feels like a groundswell and you're hearing this from multiple people. If you're only hearing it from like me and our CTO, we failed.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Well, I really want to thank you, Karynn, for coming on the podcast. This has been great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks
It was
for the time.
great
This
being
was
here.
awesome.